Jill.
It will be captured for posterity or possibly blackmail at a later date. Who knows? Anything is possible. And hello, Renee is here. That's good.
Hello. Yeah, I'm here.
Zoom meeting ID 942-615-1670.
And Marcy is here because I hear her.
Hello.
Hello, I want to welcome you all to our first installment of Creativity Through Crisis. And this is going to be, I hope, the beginning of a series of panel discussions where we explore how crises throughout time and history and the current crisis that we're going through have impacted art and creativity. So we have some great panelists joining us today, and I'm looking forward to hearing from all of them. We have Alex Gregory. He is the curator of art at the Amarillo Museum of Art. Alex graduated with an MFA from WTAMU in 2006 and has been with the museum in various roles since 2007. Along with his wife, Mandy, he operated a gallery at Sunset Center, where he organized exhibitions for local and regional artists. And he has also taught a weekly pottery class at the Amarillo Art Institute for more than 10 years.
Dean Johnson update +1-806-206.
Hey, Marcy, can you mute your microphone?
I'll try. I'm sorry. I didn't realize it was on, but let me try. I'm on my computer, and I usually do this with my phone.
Jill?
I can do it to her. Okay, that's true. Marcy, I'm muting you. No offense. She is muted. Let's talk about Renee now. Renee is assistant professor of photography at AC, and she curates photography exhibits for the Southern Light Gallery and serves on the Photography Society for the Amarillo Museum of Art. Renee West's photographs have appeared in more than 100 exhibitions in museums and galleries in solo, two-person, and group shows across the United States. And I think of all the people that I know, Renee has been the most productively creative during this crisis. I have been creative about ways I've been unproductive, but I don't think that's positive. Next, we're joined by Hillary Hulsey. Hillary is the content manager for Panhandle PBS, and she teaches Introduction to Film at AC. Her interests include classical Hollywood, film history, and stardom. And she has a master's from the University of British Columbia in film studies. Is that correct? She's muted. Nod your head.
Yes, it is correct, Jill.
I wanted to get your degree correct. And last but certainly not least, Stephanie Young. Stephanie is an artist and educator and has been teaching at Amarillo College since 2009. She has a Master's of Art in Art History and an MFA in Painting, both from Oklahoma University. And also on with us today is Cassie Montgomery. Cassie is the Director of Outreach at Amarillo College, and she is here to answer any questions anyone might have about enrollment in summer or fall classes. So feel free to chat with Cassie at any time. Each of our panelists has prepared a short presentation based on their particular area of expertise about how living through crisis impacts creativity, informs and prompts creativity. And then following the four presentations, we will open up the floor for questions through chat or through voice. And you can submit your enrollment questions through chat at any time or hang out after we're done to speak to Cassie. But we're going to begin with Alex. And
let me see her.
I know some of you saw before we were getting started that I have a slide about the current show at the Amarillo Museum of Art. And this
is her house,
a virtual show, and it's It's a show that
Wow.
partners AC and
Nice.
WT students.
Get a plant in the
If you're
wall.
not speaking, please mute.
That's all you can see.
Hey guys, if you're not speaking, please mute your mics and then we will have less feedback and distraction, okay?
Pretty.
Sound good? All right, so now we are going to turn to Alex, and Alex will share a little bit about what is going on in the world of art.
Yeah, so the world of art has changed a lot, as has the entire world. But I think crisis is one of those things that drives creativity. And so you have to get creative when you're faced with a crisis. And that includes with visual art and other things, but including solutions to the crisis. Of course, historically, there's been crisis that has changed the way that art is both created and what it is, meant to do. For instance, you couldn't talk about the Spanish War without thinking about Goya and some of his images of the war. And of course, following World War I, gave birth to Dada and Surrealism. And both of those were kind of a counterpoint to society and the way that it was, kind of a critique on the economic power and the way that the rise of nationalism and also the profiteering off of war, which, that still happens now. There was a board member of the the Whitney Museum of American Art that was asked to resign from the board for his involvement in a company that produced tear gas that was used on the border. And he resigned his position on the board. Of course, the same sort of protest art was made during the Vietnam War to challenge the same basic idea. One of the board members at the moment was also charged with profiteering off of the napalm that was used. And so there was a art group that held a performance art piece that was a critique of that. So yeah, war and crisis in general leads to a lot of protest, and it's not necessarily always political protest. There's also the protest in aesthetic. So like the Dada movement was born out of that idea that the idea is more important than the aesthetic. And so the aesthetic was secondary. Another thing that kind of came out of that is the use of collage and found materials. One of the most famous Dada objects was the fountain by Marcel Duchamp, which was a found urinal that got put on a pedestal. So, objects that are already in existence, if you're short on space and you're short on materials, then you turn to what's at hand. And so I see a lot of that going on, particularly in my household with my kids. We use what we have at hand. Thankfully, I have a lot of art materials at hand. But being a potter, I don't have access to the facilities that I did have with kilns and clay and wheels and that sort of thing. So for me, that's been put on hold. And I think for a lot of artists, that's, if you don't have access to your studio, or your studio is a shared space, then if you're driven to create and you have to create in order to get through this mentally, physically, you're going to turn to what's available to you.
I've seen sculptures out of bread and things like that.
Oh yeah. Well, and there's also a big kind of push towards moving, or I'm sure you've seen some of the famous paintings that have removed all of the people that were in the paintings, like Sunday in the Park and images like that. So yeah, people are taking a creative interest in art and reproducing famous paintings. Yeah, being creative with what's at hand and with what they can see. Thankfully, we are in the age of the internet, and so there is no shortage of ideas and sharing of ideas and sharing of artwork. If this happened before the internet was born, it would be a completely different situation.
I think the series of photos people have been doing reproducing famous works of art, I find that really exciting because it shows people know what famous works of art are. And you don't get it unless you know the original piece. And it's probably one of the more intellectual things I've seen while wasting time online.
Yeah. But it is interesting how, people turn back to history and then, deal with what they have at hand. And it'll be interesting to see how, following World War I and the Spanish influenza, which was kind of just a footnote for the First World War, a lot of that was dealt with personally. And I think the same thing with our current pandemic. A lot of that's going to be a personal change. You know, artists may not be able to go back to doing the things that they did before. They're going to develop new styles and work with new materials. A lot of times things get scaled down in size if you don't have access to a large studio, and become more intimate and thoughtful and poignant. And so I kind of, you know, it's hard to say what it's going to look like 20 years from now, but scholars can go back and look at that, and that could be a change. Some of that happened, you know, towards conceptual art and other art movements following the World War I, and even World War II. You know, at that time, Europe was central to, was considered the art capital of the world. And following World War II, that moved to New York, and abstract expressionists, and, you know, birthed a whole different movement that led into pop art and minimalism and all of these other movements. And so it'll be interesting to see how culture as a whole, and visual art specifically, changes over time following this.
Do you anticipate someday a pandemic exhibit?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And there are some of those already going on online, of course, but you know, and that's the interesting thing about being in the creative field, is people have found ways to share art and ideas across as much as they can. So, you know, for instance, what we're doing is we've put a weekly art challenge online for anyone that wants to participate, and it's been based on art movements for particular artists. Like we had a Picasso challenge and a Monet challenge, a surrealism challenge, which I think is very fitting for the pandemic that we're in. You know, it's a very surreal time. We've also, you know, put a lot of art-centric ways to kill time, crossword puzzles and word finds and connect the dots and coloring pages, and then still trying to put exhibitions so they're still viewable. You know, we weren't able to have the ACWT show, as you mentioned on that first slide, but the images from the artists are on our website, and so people can browse through what would have been hanging on the walls. We're working on doing the same thing with the Texas Panhandle Student Art Show. The regional base winners are going to be put on for that Texas Panhandle Student Art Show. And then, you know, if we end up being in self-isolation for a long period of time, I plan on installing exhibitions and doing the same thing, you know, sharing them with video, sharing them with virtual tour, you know, just moving on.
Certainly, given the technology on hand, we can cope better than during other events like the Spanish flu. There was nothing like this technology, but I think in some ways it makes it too available, that people are inundated with so much information that they kind of glaze over.
Right. But I do think being inundated with creative thoughts and creative use of materials and all of that is better than being inundated and focusing too much on the news and politics of the moment. You know, if you can get away from that and spend, you know, 30 minutes a day just, you know, concentrating on if you can get over the white fright and just start something, then you can continue on, and you'll be surprised at the amount of time that goes by and how much better that focused thought and focused energy is, as opposed to just bouncing randomly from news article to news article.
And I would guess that a lot of the work being produced right now is in response to what's going on in the media and politics and thoughts like that. And so I think this might be a good time to bring in Renee West, who has been creating a photo series just about every day since we began. And it's helped her respond to, and I would say, deal with the situation at hand. Renee, are you there? We've lost
Yes.
Renee. Yes.
Yeah, I think I counted today that I had posted 33 times to my Instagram account images that are at times humorous and at times serious, but they're little still lifes. Can you put them up on the screen?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that in the past, in making art, there's been many occasions, as I was thinking back, as both a singer-songwriter and as a visual artist, there's been many times when I've responded to things that I found pretty much unbearable by through creativity, and this was a way that I could look at something but have a sort of a wall of distance between me and what was really happening on, because by focusing on making art about something, it has a way of removing it at the same time, and making it about the art instead of about this horrible thing that's happening. And so when this started to happen, and I knew I was going to self-isolate, I've been in since Thursday before spring break. I've been out twice. I really don't want to catch this. And I have been through so many different phases of this, from just humor and just the insanity of it all to serious swings of depression, and through all of this, I keep making these images. And it's so helpful to me that I actually dream about these images, and I write notes. I have little notes on my piece of paper right now on ideas for new still lifes that will be coming up. And I see here the one that they ran on the AC website was my Easter Day greeting. So I had this weird, Jill said something about, where did you get all these weird things? But anyway, that's another story perhaps. And it's interesting, these dolls come out at some of the most unusual times. They came out during the Iraq War also, to make images about collateral damage and referring to human lives lost as collateral damage. And so these dolls keep coming out. This one was from a meeting that I had with the faculty. And at one point I said, my world just seems upside down today. And so the next morning I put the world upside down and the heads underneath it. One day I lost my keys. And of course, if I couldn't find my keys, I couldn't get into my garden shed, which is my other sort of safe haven, is to go to the garden and just dig weeds or whatever. I couldn't find my keys, so this one was called The Case of the Missing Keys. And this one, the day before, every day I said, I'm stir crazy, I'm going stir crazy, I don't know what I'm gonna do. So the next day I'd written that down, and these it's a clown head, a horse puppet head, and a little doll head on the ground, and it's titled Stir Crazy. And I just sat there for like 30 minutes in the morning trying to shake the glass and get a tiny bit of motion blur and a good composition simultaneously. And so every day it's just something. This one up here, the one with the boat and I guess it's a Mr. Peanut Man, I'm not really sure. It's called Sea of Pain. One night, just out of nowhere, I got this horrendous backache. And for a day and a half, I could hardly move. And nothing had caused it except maybe anxiety. And so that night I dreamed about this image. And the funny part was I knew exactly where this little boat and man were, and they were in storage. And I just like unpacked them and went right to them and found them. So it's a way for me to channel what's going on. It's almost like a journal. There was one back there that I did want to point out, because it was like my first day, I think, on Zoom maybe, or maybe it was a week into Zoom. Yeah, there it is. No, not that one. That one's it. This is just nuts. And social distancing 6 feet. It's up above that one. No, up right there.
That one?
Yeah. It's called Zoom. And so it's, my experience with teaching with Zoom and just responding to that in a sort of humorous, relatable way. This image was liked by a guy in Austria, and I'm now part of his website where he's showing people's work dealing with COVID-19. So that's the first thing that I've been asked to do. There's another thing that's in the works that hasn't happened yet. But so people all over the world are starting to look at this work already, like what Alex was talking about and you asking about exhibitions. I'm already in an exhibition with this work. And I've started printing them as Van Dyke prints.
Oh, wow.
So they're, and I did this for the guy who requested my images as a part of the exhibition, because so much of the exhibition was handmade prints and wet plate collodions and things like that. And so this is Zoom as a Van Dyke print. And as Alex said, stuff's getting smaller because I have to work in my darkroom at my home and with the materials that I have available. And so things are getting small and handheld and easier to manage. But anyway, so that's kind of what I've been up to. And I make one every morning, whether I want to or not, whether I have an idea or not. I mean, this is just nuts. I had no idea. And I walked into the kitchen and there was this, bowl full of pecans, and I just stuck a doll's arm in it and a head and said, this is nuts. Because it is nuts, right? I think I'd been home for maybe, you can count the days, but I think I'd been home for like a couple of weeks at that point. And yeah, that's kind of what I felt like, April 3rd. So yeah, we're a good 2 weeks into it by then, right? This is just nuts. And I didn't have an idea that morning. So some mornings I do, some mornings I don't. I do them in about 20 or 30 minutes, but the truth is I think about them and dream about them all day and all night. And then I usually, at this point, because of that work happening every day, day in and day out, and knowing that you're going to do that, I now find that I have an idea every morning. And if I don't, when I go to bed, I dream, and in the morning, the idea is really crystallized for me. Today, I've been gathering stuff in the yard. We'll see what happens in the morning. Because sometimes I just change right at the last minute, too. Something falls apart, and you just say, hey, that's kind of neat. Do that.
I think what's so amazing about it is the discipline, because I've had lots of ideas, but I have not followed through with things during this time and spent a lot of time thinking about how much time I'm wasting not doing anything.
Well, I learned a really valuable lesson with the Iraq War, and I don't have those images to share. I'm sorry about that, but they've been lost in moves or whatever. I couldn't find them when I went looking for them. But that war, I was sick. I was at a conference and I got the flu, and I was sick in a hotel room watching Shock and Awe on CNN. And I'm not much of a TV person, and I had a really high fever, and it deeply affected me. And when I got home, I could not make any art whatsoever. I felt just paralyzed, and I had never felt that before in my life. I've always been a creative person that could always make work no matter what was going on. And all of a sudden, an image came to me through the news. I saw something, I saw a shadow, I thought about light, I had those broken dolls. And all of a sudden, I made this image that was about this child who had been really damaged by a bomb, and how all the spotlights of the world were on that child at their very, very worst moment in their life. And the dam broke. And then I couldn't stop making work. And I found that as the more work I made, the less I thought about things. I mean, I was writing down how many people had died every day, just like now I'm writing down how many people die every day. And I found that the work freed me to not have to think about it like that. And I could focus on something besides that, which was really helpful for my sanity. So this time when it happened, I was just like, I must get to work on this right away. It's going to be so helpful for my ability to cope during this time period. And so that was really, truly the motivation, was just, I got to do this. I got to start doing this right away. And I know it will help if I do. So that's what I did.
I feel like the images really capture the surreal, absurd quality of this time. And it's just such a strange time. And I think that every time, and if when this is over, if I look back at those images, it will bring it all back, which is one of the things about the power of art, to help people respond and remember and capture a feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of changing our direction, but not really changing. We're going to move now to Hillary, who's looked at film in response to art. And Hillary teaches our intro to film class, as I mentioned before, and has prepared a little presentation about film through the ages. Hillary, are you going to join us?
I am.
There she is.
Hi, everyone. Are you going to? Am I
Yes.
going to tell you next slide, or how's this going to work?
Yes, you're going to have to direct me because I'm slow.
No, you're.
What can I say? But
I actually don't think it's too far of a stretch from transitioning from Renee to myself, only because so much of what I teach in my class is about how you can't help but be influenced by the cultural moment or the historical moment that you're within. And I think that's so true in film history. So today I've chosen to talk about genre films because film is something we do, and we entertain ourselves so passively. It's something we do to escape. I'm sure a lot of you have been watching Netflix and trying to escape into that. Seen a lot of memes about finishing Netflix. I haven't done that yet, but I have escaped into films, and I think that people have done that since the beginning of its history. So if you'll go to the next slide, Jill. Thank you. I just have a brief description here. Actually, it's not that brief. Good luck reading it. It's about genre. So if you think about genre is just another word for categorization. And it really was born out of a need to market films. So if you saw a cowboy and the Old West and, this classic story between good and evil in an old Western town, if that was your fancy, you would go see a Western. And studios realized this very early on, that they could get people to come and watch movies based on specific genres. But something that happened with genre, and as I've said here, it functions really out of a cultural need as well. We see that genres cycle throughout history. So Western hasn't always been popular. In fact, it's faded in and out of popularity from the 20s to the 50s and then beyond. But they cycle in and out based on historical and cultural moments. So I wanted to go through some examples here. If you'll go to the next slide, Jill. In the 1920s, we saw, of course, the rise of the musical. That's out of a technological need. Obviously, we have music available in movies now. It's no longer a silent picture. But musicals really met the needs of audiences during the post-Great War era. And you also see that these musicals, from the image on your screen, were very lavish, and they had huge production budgets. This looks like the Roaring '20s, but the musicals existed, and I think that the directors and the screenwriters and choreographers certainly use this time to sort of uplift spirits. And it worked for a time, but obviously at the end of the 20s, we had the stock market crash, and we moved into the 30s, which is the era of the Great Depression. And people weren't into these lavish musicals anymore. They wanted to see things that would make them laugh. They wanted to go to the movies and to sit back and passively watch. My favorite genre that came out of the 1930s is the screwball comedy, which is a subgenre of comedy. And the screwball comedy, its number one trope or narrative characteristic that you can undoubtedly count on is the belittling of the upper classes. Typically, your lower class individuals are the really smart and witty characters that you see in these movies. And then you see the upper class characters, they're kind of dolts. I think that it really, it met the needs of audiences at the time, and it's something that certainly filmmakers at the time knew that audiences needed. And then moving into the 40s, thank you, Jill. We have a lot of people will debate if this is a genre or not, but I think film noir is a great, at least historical moment. Film noir was born from World War II. It starts as early as about 1941 and it lasts until about 1958. Film noir is literally dark film. You see these bright whites and these dark darks. There's that huge contrast. And I think this is a great example of how style feeds into this creative example of meeting a narrative need. So understanding characters based on the lighting in the films, specifically because they're crime-oriented films. People were disillusioned by World War II and that maybe America wasn't as great as they thought it was, and that maybe things weren't as on the up and up after World War II. And so you see the rise of these crime films with this noir style following World War II. And I used Rosie the Riveter. Oh, sorry, Jill. I'm going to talk one more second. You don't have to go back if you don't want to. I used Rosie the Riveter as an example here because actually she is the emblem of the introduction of the femme fatale in film history. So you see Barbara Stanwyck here in Double Indemnity from 1944. She is a Spider Woman, and she was born out of the fact that men returned to the United States to women working in their former jobs. And so you see a lot of derogatory framing of women during this time through the femme fatale. So that's the example from the 40s. We can move to the 50s. So this is perhaps my favorite example of how art really reflects everything that's happening around us culturally. If you think back to the 1950s, and a lot of people have this affinity for these horrible science fiction B movies. When you think science fiction, you think of things like rocket ships and alien invasions and, you know, mutants occasionally. And I think that this genre particularly pairs so well with what was happening in the 1950s, because we did have chemical warfare. We did have, you know, the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These fears were expressed in science fiction films, and of course the fear of communism entering our country following World War II and in the Cold War. So Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which is the film you see here, is a movie that's about these pods that are planted in anywhere USA, and if the pod is laying next to you while you sleep, you become the pod person, and it looks exactly like you, and your husband wakes up next to you in bed and you look the same, but you're different. So it's this whole metaphor for communism. So I use these examples leading to a contemporary example so that you could perhaps relate a little bit more to it. I think what we've seen for the past 15 years is superheroes. It's a hybrid genre of action and a little bit of noir as the years have gone by. And this certainly came out of the attacks on the Twin Towers in New York City in 9/11. So, you know, we've seen this need for a hero in America in the last 15 years. And slowly but surely you've seen the genre transform from this focus on superheroes to the villains, and maybe how they're a little bit more complex than we ever thought that they were. So I think why I like looking at genre, and why I do think that these historic moments are important to look at, is that you see really where we are situated in culture. And then that poses the question, how will this pandemic manifest through film genre? So that's all that I have to say, Jill, I guess.
Well, and so right now we're not producing movies. All film production is on hold, but allegedly movie theaters will be opening up sometime in the not so distant future. And it will be interesting to me to see we start Ruth. She'll never forgive me for it, but it will be interesting to see as we move forward.
I just wanted to tune into her.
Trying to find Ruth to mute her. Ruth, mute yourself. I can't find you.
If there are participants, you can call if you're the host.
I have to find her in order to mute her. I can do it, but I have to find her. She's hiding from me. There she is. She muted herself. Okay, so I forgot entirely what I was saying, but we're talking about movies in response to the pandemic, and it may be a while before certain topics can even be touched on because people will be kind of terrified, is what I'm wondering.
Well, and kind of going back to what Alex was saying about, using what you've got on hand. I mean, at PBS, we've had to figure out how to make content from Zoom meetings and, our phones. So it makes me wonder how that will influence what is considered quality and what we're willing to watch, because it's what's available.
Yeah, our approach to what makes good production has changed. And I don't know that that's affecting artwork in the same way as it's affecting film and video production, but that's something we can talk about when we open up to the group for sure. Anything else before we turn to Stephanie?
No, I feel like I yammered way too much. It's all good.
No, you didn't, but we will have you back to yammer more in a minute.
Cool, thanks.
Now it's Stephanie's turn. Stephanie?
Hi. I've really enjoyed everything I've heard so far. Alex's beautiful comments about and touching back on art history, which we'll do a little bit more of. And Renee, just incredible work. I've been on an extended social media fast. That was really beautiful, impressive that you're using this time so well. And I'm using it so poorly in many respects, but I have a presentation, Jill, that you can bring up, and we'll start there. One of the things I've been really interested in watching as people have begun to respond to this pandemic in various ways is some of the more, I guess, kind of more pop culture sort of references. So I got this in my news feed from a site that I like called It's Nice That. These emojis, I think the idea of like emojis and memes as being one of the major ways that we communicate and make artwork at this time, I think that's really important. A weep from home seems so apropos at this moment. And as we kind of move forward, there have been some interesting like little tiny films, coming back to what Hillary was saying. If you go to the next slide, Jill. Miriam Benani and her work. There's a little film here. I think it's about two minutes, and I know I've included so many links here that probably too many.
Yes, there are too many links here. I'm lost.
There's too many.
This film?
It's the, yeah. I'm sorry about that. Yeah.
This is interesting driving this thing.
Yeah, sorry.
There it is.
Next time I will do PowerPoint instead of Google Slides. But this little film, Two Lizards Episode 1, which you should be able, I think you've got it.
Or am I not there yet?
You may not be. It may be further up. But regardless, yeah, sorry. It's just a little, we don't have to watch it. It's just a little, 2-minute or so clip. It's very surreal, so I think surrealism is exactly the right art movement to be talking about at this time. That kind of comes back to this notion of what we're doing in isolation, how we're watching things on our screens. And it's this very strange combination of being extremely intimate with each other, seeing into each other's homes, seeing each other's pets and each other's children, hearing kind of intimate commentary, in the background, while at the same time being removed from each other. That I think is just very interesting. I make a little comment in this slide here. I'm not sure that creativity thrives in crisis. There's been a lot written about how creativity is this, response to crisis. I think that you can be most creative maybe right before, maybe right after. If you personally are in the thick of it, you're not thinking about that. And, you know, that's one of the kind of interesting things, is that we are, many of us, in a position that I would call stasis. You know, we're kind of trapped in between states. And if you are not sick right now yourself, if you don't have a loved one who is sick right now that you're having to respond to, if you haven't lost your job right now and you're trying to figure out how to put food on the table, around those spaces we can begin to be really, I think, creative and work with our psychological response. But I think when you're right in the middle of it, you know, you're doing something else. And that's, I guess, you know, one of the things that I've found written about very recently was people who feel very traumatized psychologically about what's going on, understandably, and I'm right there. And at the same time also feel like they cannot really, you know, own that, because they're not, maybe they're not in a financial crisis, or they're not ill themselves. So I think being caught in this thing where it's like you're feeling something but you're not supposed to feel it, it's a interesting spot, and it's kind of, I think, very much appropriate to surrealism. So if you go to the next slide.
It's almost paralyzing.
Yes.
There's something about this time that seems to be causing a lot of my students to lose motivation. And as you said, they don't feel like they can feel bad because things aren't that bad.
Exactly
But
right.
they do feel bad.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And that is a very strange psychological state. I can't compare it, like I thought back to on Monday in art history, I was talking about Goya, and it was really great to hear, you know, some of my students responding to that work. Incredible. You know, but I can't put what's happening right now into the kind of gritty, bloody physicality of crises of the past, because in so many respects, for most of us, it's a non-physical experience. You know, if you're not one of those frontline responders, if you're not in the hospital. Anyway, I think we're acting in part out of our psychological distress and our perceptions of things very insightfully, like we saw with Renee's work. And then we're also doing a lot of things out of boredom. And so if you're kind of watching what people are doing out of boredom, you know, creating, you know, like, oh, my kid turned 21, so I'm going to turn my house into a nightclub kind of thing. This was just such a beautiful challenge, recreate works of art with things you have at home. That was so great. The lasagna noodles. I've gotten some of those. Oh, the harp in the vacuum, right? The Cycladic sculpture, beautiful. So creative and so fun. And also, you know, what a great way to get into art history in such a non-threatening, enjoyable way. So this has been one of the things that I've opened up as extra credit in my art history class. And so I put in that slide, Tasha Gerardo and her, oh, I'm so sorry for putting in so many links. But anyway, I've got some
one?
Yeah, sure. That's Tasha's, but if you click through, you'll see some of the other student works, yeah, from Artemisia Gentileschi, and of course the Arnold Feeney portrait. Anyway. Yeah, Cecilia did one. Great. Parker's friend here is Louis XIV. Frida Kahlo.
Those are great.
Yeah, so it's been that's been really fun. And you know, we've had a lot of shares that have really highlighted this like sweetness and tenderness between people. So you can skip those links, but I think that's been a really beautiful thing to see how people are creating warm spaces for and with each other. But I think as an artist, thinking about how we're dematerializing art right now is very interesting. Google Tilt Brush, I think, is one of the means by which we're going to be able to create art with a non-material kind of a product, a digital product, a three-dimensional illusion that we can enter into. And there have been a number of serious, I might call more conventionally serious virtual art exhibitions that have been pulled together. There's one called Art at a Time Like This, which you may want to look at. And and you have to kind of like scroll down. There's a number of artists. Probably the best known of these artists is Ai Weiwei. The polar bear piece is actually a really interesting piece where they've animated the polar bear. It's very short. You don't have to click on it, but speaking about mining and speaking about our relationship with the earth. Because I think one of the other things that's happening right now is this is like a moment where we can begin to think about how we want to live in the future and make choices. So there's a lot of cool work in that particular exhibition. And I'm definitely talking too much, but I've got more. But if we go on to the next slide, I'm so sorry.
Don't be.
If we go on to the next slide, this particular commercial I saw as a surrealist artwork, and it's a commercial for the Facebook portal. And again, you know, it's probably too long to play, but let's just look at that tagline. If you can't be there, feel there. And the soundtrack for this commercial is the Queen David Bowie song, Under Pressure. And so, you know, you're hearing those words and they have them spelled out on the screen. And so there's this moment where it's like this like kid's birthday party. I think it's this little girl. And the words come up, it's the terror of knowing what this world is about. And it's just like this weird juxtaposition of, oh, look, you can be sort of with somebody. They can be in your home, but not in your home. But it's the terror of knowing what this world is about. And it was just this, I think, kind of brilliant little surreal mini film. But if we go on to the next slide, this thing has just come out. This is a suit that they're looking at producing. It's like, how would we go to a concert, for example? How would we go to a place where there's a lot of people? What do we need to actually do that? And so they're designing, it's essentially like a little spacesuit that's you know, going to completely enclose the body, has a helmet, will filter your air, and, you know, kind of has this cool aesthetic. I think that's, I'm sorry, what?
How could we afford that, though?
I
mean, concerts are already too expensive.
Right? Maybe they'll rent them to us at the door.
Complete with someone else's job.
But anyway, I mean, I think that that's one of the ways that artists and designers are responding to what we're going to be needing in the future. So the last couple slides here are all art historical references. So if you go on to the next one, you know, if you talk about art in a time of, quote, plague, one of the first things that comes up is Francesco Trani's Triumph of Death, which I think we may have skipped. But if we look at, like, I don't know how appropriate that is to this time, but I'm thinking about Italy. I was thinking about all the, you know, the bodies stacked up. I think it was Madrid where they had bodies stacked up in an ice rink. And what is that? Like, what would that experience be? And in this painting, you know, we see people of all classes, all powerless against death. And so that's, you know, one of those early artworks that, you know, I might think of. If we scroll down, Edward Hopper, a lot of people have written about Edward Hopper as being kind of the great muse of this time. There's a couple images. I thought Carolina Morning reminded me a little bit of what, you know, it might be like if you were out in the plains, you know, sort of by yourself looking out across a field. That sense of the person, the single person in isolation, I think really, you know, obviously one of the haunting things about Edward Hopper, and a lot of people have written about that lately. if you go on to the next slide, I think one of the artists that I think of as being maybe especially useful to look at this time is Rene Magritte. And Rene Magritte's work, this particular series that he called Lovers, with people with shrouded heads, one of the connections that was made is that his mother died of suicide, and when her body was found, her nightgown was wrapped around her face. And so there have been some people who've said, maybe this is part of why we see that image recurring in his work a number of times. But even the idea of just covering the face, that sense of intimacy in the pose, yet at the same time, separation through this material. And I'm thinking, of course, of the face masks, right? I think is pretty right on. So there's another image after, and then I've got just a couple more. If we look at this one, I think this is an interesting one because somebody had mentioned the politicizing of this event, which is certainly part of the national conversation right now. And so this piece I thought would be especially appropriate to look at, Napoleon at the Pest House in Jaffa. This was essentially a piece of propaganda that was meant to glorify Napoleon. You can see him there standing in the center and his arm reaching out to touch this man who is, very ill. And the way in which he's touching him is it's sort of like a gesture of the doubting Thomas touching Christ that you see in art history. But the storyline about this, of course, he's removed his glove, right? Everybody else around him is holding cloths over their face and they're afraid, but he's not because he's a hero. When some of these men managed to recover from the plague, there were some people who were able to get better, or in any case, he had them poisoned. They were on their way back to France. He had them poisoned because he didn't want to take any risk in bringing that illness back to France. So it's just a really great piece of propaganda art, and I think there's plenty of that kind of imagery that is being used for posturing right now. So the last couple pieces. This one, Ai Weiwei, is, I think, one of the most important artists that's working right now. Probably one of the best known too. And he was in the middle of staging a production of Turandot, and he was an extra in a production of Turandot as a young man. And that opera by Puccini is, the storyline doesn't necessarily work together, but I was thinking about it afterwards. The story is of a woman who is refusing marriage, and she's kind of like this ice princess archetype. And finally, this one particular figure kind of breaks through to her. Thinking about the hazmat suits and the face masks that he had the artists come out in at this later date when he was responding to what was happening in Italy, I thought that was an interesting choice. He's also done a piece called Human Flow, referencing the global refugee crisis, and a very interesting piece because I think something that we ought to be thinking about is the relationship to surveillance. That's one of the things that we've talked about, like how do you track the progress of the virus. This notion of watching, I think, is going to be really important. So this was a series of dioramas that Ai Weiwei staged in 2014 about his 81 days in detention in China. And he's written quite a bit about the Chinese response to the virus, which I think that's worth looking at. Finally, just this very, very last two more slides here. I think the idea of becoming more abstract, things becoming less material, less physical, I think that's one of the things that's going to happen as we move forward. And so Ian Wilson, who's an important conceptual artist, he just died recently. And so thinking about that kind of work, he did a series of work called The Discussions, and they were all discussions about art. One of the things he said was, language is the most formless means of expression. And he didn't want any of those things published or recorded, but he had this this kind of idea that we were moving toward a kind of pure abstraction, that we could do it through language. The last slide is just, some thoughts. I really think that here's where we're going to get creative. Is going to be in relationship to social issues, not toward aesthetic issues. And those things, as we've heard from everybody, are very much linked together. I think aesthetics can guide us, at this time, especially if we look to nature. I think that we need to look toward what you might call like biomimicry, to create systems that might be more fair in a variety of ways. But I think the real disarray is ahead of us. I don't think we're in it yet. I don't think we're going to be looking back on it anytime soon. I think we're going to be in it. And I think it's going to be collaborative. I think it's going to be very creative. And I've talked way too much. Thank you.
You have not. What I want to do now is open this up for questions and conversation. My mind is swimming with all sorts of ideas, and I think that we've certainly seen through everyone's presentations the power of art and the importance of art. Does anyone want to start, to be the first brave person to jump in? If not, you can start on chat. I'm going to pull up my chat window so I can see what's going on. Okay, no one's going to start, so I'm going to have to start with a question.
Oh, sorry, Jill. Oh, I was going to say something, but never mind. I won't now.
Go ahead, Derek.
No. Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to be a spectator and not interrupt any of y'all's way more insightful dialect. However, I just wanted to mention that, I know there's a variety of different people on here right now. And forgive the sound of me and my son throwing the ball, playing catch right now. But really, for me, at least as an instructor, it's been really encouraging to me to see the level of commitment that the people who really committed to learning, they're doing, how much they're willing to sacrifice, and how much they're willing to go through these really awkward times with us to kind of follow along with us and take this journey with us to continue their obviously some people dropping as of I know this is not exactly the topic, but some people dropping off because of actual physical inabilities to connect, but I've really been really excited, and I'm excited and impressed with the initiative of the students who've stuck around. So I just wanted to mention that that people who have the drive, they're not going to lose the drive because they have a couple extra obstacles in front of them, and that's something that's really struck me lately.
It is certainly a very challenging time for art students because art classes, video production classes, graphic design classes, music classes, all of these are hands-on classes. And so we are approaching them in this new manner. And it's simultaneously more distracting and then in the same way, slightly less distracting because we're isolated with our ability to work on things, but at the same time, we feel kind of lost and paralyzed. So I certainly do applaud all of the students who are creating things, as well as the artists who are creating things, especially because I haven't been one of them. I feel like I've done what I need to do, but I could do more.
Yeah, the same thing here. One thing that I've noticed.
We keep losing you, Derek. I think you're outside.
To commit, like they are super willing to commit. I am outside, and I don't know where else to go, and I'll pop off. But yeah, but am I still here or no? I'll pop off if not.
You're come and go. You're here now.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so yeah, those who have been there and committed all along they've stayed there and committed all along. And that's been something that's been really encouraging to me, as somebody instructing, and it helps me, it helps feed me as an instructor, because I need that as well. Like right now, just like you said, if you're not super inspired like me right now as a designer, I'm not super inspired, but I'm more inspired by what I can do to help other people be inspired. And so it's been a really nice thing to have that.
But I also feel like a lot of artists create because they have to. That's part of their driving force. They can't help themselves.
No,
And
you're
so
100. Yeah, you're 100% correct. Like that's a textbook definition of someone like myself, or most of the designers I know, who are really, really deep thinkers, and also deep, or just like overly obsessive artists and designers. And in a time right now, especially when you have people like, people who have, depressive tendencies, this can, for some people it can boost them, but for other people, I feel like it does paralyze them. But having that connection to at least be able to bring along the next generation of people is a really positive thing. And I feel like it's kind of helped me to be able to stay afloat during this period.
it's
Yeah.
It's an exciting time and a terrifying time to teach art as well as create art, but it's also a privilege, I think, to be part of the group leading artists through this. One of the things that I've seen written about a lot is how we're turning to art, particularly movies and television, but also music, and all of the distractions on the internet to entertain us during this time. Do you think that we will come out with greater value for creators, or will we go back to undervaluing creativity?
I mean, if you're asking me specifically, I would definitely hope that we would value it more. I mean, rationally, you would think that we would. I mean, but we've also seen the opposite happen in the past. But just being an eternal optimist, despite my just being an eternal optimist, I would like to think that we'll come out of this with a greater appreciation, at least for the arts, because everybody who's argued against it, now this is how they're surviving. This is how they're keeping themselves sane, is by doing these artistic things at their house, cooped up. So I would hope that would at least be a bridgeway into leading people into seriously thinking about the arts.
Hillary, how do you feel like the role of PBS during this crisis as a repository for learning materials, as well as a way to connect people to their communities and to the arts? How do you feel like it's being impacted?
I think we have a really unique position as PBS, because PBS is not often positioned next to other media outlets. We have a different kind of weight that we carry, meaning we're typically seen as educational. We have documentaries, we have of course we have things like PBS NewsHour, which is in fact, it does report news in the same way that other news outlets do, but it has a different audience, and there's a trustworthiness that PBS has. So I think that's a unique thing that we're experiencing right now. And I think, PBS, we do have all these resources that have gone unrecognized I've worked here, I guess, 3 years now, and we're only just seeing people in our area recognize that PBS Learning Media is available for them at all times. It's a free resource that has always existed, but has not been maybe not been a necessity until times like these. So I think that we've seen we're in a good position to help the community, and um, I feel lucky to be a part of it. I don't know if that answers your question, but
It does. I mean, I've been thinking about how this crisis highlights the importance of public broadcasting, the importance of museums. I've seen more people posting on things like Facebook, go to this virtual museum tour. I know you can't go to the museum, but you can go to the museum tour. That's pretty amazing. And I grew up going to art museums, but a lot of people don't have that experience. And um, outside of the museums in our area may never be able to go to other museums.
Called privilege.
well, and it's awesome that we get to bring it into people's homes. That's something that has been unique to just the film medium in general. That was what was so cool about these really affluent people who could own and afford cameras when film cameras first became a thing. They would travel around the world and bring the film back and show people who could never travel to those places what the world looked like. So the fact that most homes have a television, PBS has a unique opportunity to help people feel connected in a time like this.
And we all have our phones, and I think
Right.
that it did used to be only available to people who were privileged, and that's
Right.
one of the things we see with the evolution of the mass media. And my students have heard me talk about this too much, that at first certain types of media are only accessible to certain people who have money and power, and then they become available to the masses. And during this time, my husband has toured the world by watching YouTube videos of people who've traveled. And we'll never go to these places, but we get to watch them on our television screen. So we're getting to
Oh,
travel.
you think we'll ever travel again?
I'm beginning to wonder, but
I
yes.
love travel. So, gosh. Courtney has a really great question, which is, for those of us who aren't artists, this conversation is so meaningful. I want to document it in some way or help kids continue to create thoughts, recommendations. I think there's lots of ways to help kids be creative right now. For one thing, a lot of museums, including the Amarillo Museum of Art, are doing a lot of prompts every week to help people get inspired and to look at different genres of art or time periods in art and then respond to that. In my classes I've done, I thought at one point about sharing them and didn't, but I'm so glad Stephanie did, because I just love the ones you're doing in art history. But we've been doing a lot of projects related to COVID-19 as well. So some prompts that I've been giving students. One is the subject self. Like, who are you? What's the world you're living in right now? How is that different? What's different? Another one that I've done is what objects have changed in meaning and value to you at this time period, toilet paper probably being the most obvious one. Another one was the series of Still Lifes, which was inspired by my own project, which was inspired by a project called From My Window by Andre Cortez, the photographer. And initially I thought I would be actually using my window in the scenes, but they're gone. The window has long since gone, except as a source of light. Another one that we did was recontextualize posters, and some of those were really great. The best one of all was by a student named Jolie, who did the Breakfast Club, and she photographed her whole family in that same exact scene, but called it the Quarantine Club, and her mom had Clorox or Lysol in her hand and things like that. So reworking movie posters. And another project I gave was a documentary style, where you tried to document what your life was like in this time period by photographing the people in your house and the kinds of activities that you're doing that are kind of unusual. I know one day I read somebody on Twitter say something about, I've been cooking every day, 3 meals a day. My kids will not forget this.
So many dishes. Why are there so many dishes?
I know, there's always dishes. There's always dishes. So those are some of my ideas, Courtney. I hope they help you. And I love some of the ideas that Alex and Stephanie shared as well.
I think that everyone should direct their kids to that challenge that the art museum is doing, because I think that's a great way to focus their creativity. There's a question here from Maya about search history and how that serves you as artists. And I find that interesting, because when I'm trying to do things, when I'm about to create something, often I start with a Google search. And then I've often thought, does that hamper creativity because everything's already out there, or does it inspire?
Well, I'm thinking that we live in some pretty rare air as artists and real appreciators of art. And also this is an academic community. And so, you know, I wake up to some fresh, new, wonderful thing, some new museum, some new Egyptian artifact every few minutes, it seems. And I'm just agog. It's amazing and wonderful. And I feel so blessed. And I have said to many people, like, how extraordinary that we are, you know, sequestered, and yet we have such availability to see the world and Google Maps and then I'm thinking of that let's just say I was 20 years old right now. I probably wouldn't get those things, or as many of those things. I would be getting things about Kanye West or something. I don't know. And Kanye's an artist in his own right, you know. So I'm just wondering aloud what certain parts of our world, what are they seeing? What are they being subjected to? And thinking perhaps that their creativity is not being driven up. If their creativity is being driven up, perhaps it is nihilistic thoughts.
As a professor of mass media and a media scholar, that really brings out the fact that we marinate in whatever we surround ourselves with. And so many people are, you know, they're strictly looking at what they're navel gazing. They're not exposing themselves to anything beyond their immediate world and their friends. And although I enjoy a good meme, you have to move past that, which is, of course, the role of education, is to take people and move them past that. And that's one of the goals. But I do think that different people are having everyone's having very isolated experiences during this pandemic. And that would also be true of creators. And I've been amazed by the conversations I've had with people all over the world about teaching. So I think we create our environments more so now than ever before.
We curate our own experience. And it used to be that our experiences were created by the world that we lived in and the people that we lived near. And, you know, even 100 years ago, people never traveled more than, 50 miles outside of where they were born. And now, like I was just invited to be a part of a show online from a guy in Austria I've never met before in my life. And we've shared interesting conversations, and I'm seeing this other work from people. And so that's the world I'm curating, is other artists that are making work and responding to this. And I'm finding strength in that because, I see what they're doing, and we have something we can share and something in common. But I have no idea what my neighbors are doing. I never see them. I never speak to them. So it's really interesting the way the internet has changed how we can really curate our lives to the point where we never hear a dissenting opinion.
That's kind of terrifying. I think that our ability to insulate ourselves from voices that we disagree with is very dangerous. But on the other hand, for the students who are with us today, our ability to expose us to a wide community of people who inspire us and who will help us grow as creators is really exciting.
I think I definitely agree with Maya, how she was talking about the younger students are being more subjected to, like, you know, copying them and then being artists in themselves, which they are. But I think that if, you know, younger generations like myself, if we took more classes like these and got on more things like these, they would definitely help us to open up to different artists and different things that they would be able to learn off of. Because me, myself, I wouldn't have ever joined an art class because I'm not one for the art, but it definitely taught me that art can be more than just you being able to draw and, you know, making art. It can show you that anything can be art as long as you're really subjected to it and you really know how to be creative with it.
That kind of answers the question, why do we have to take that? We've all gotten some of our classes. There is certainly a reason that these classes are required, and it makes a difference in the end. It's part of understanding and making sense of the world around you. We have a
I was just going to say that I don't typically create with art materials, paint or pottery or whatever. And the conversation right now is so huge around food security. And so I find that my creativity has really taken the avenue of cooking and creating in that way. And I find myself having a fantasy about being able to cook for my neighborhood, and how would I have, you know, like a huge picnic table where people could in my neighborhood could just come and have a meal. And, you know, and then of course I fast forward to when this is over, you know. So creativity takes so many different avenues, and it's so refreshing to see all of the ways that this pandemic is moving forward and creating new ideas and new ideas, really. And but mine is just in food. That was an interesting thing to see how this has really come out. Plus, I have the time to really pursue it. So my is everything in my pantry.
I think food has become extremely important, though, because of the scarcity that people have faced on shelves. But also, you've seen people baking bread and pictures of the things they've created, and we're sharing our creations. It's something everybody needs, and it's something we can all relate to.
You know, I have the same or very similar thoughts regarding my garden and my plants, because this is always a time when I divide my plants and then give them to my friends to plant in their gardens, or I'll take plants to school and share them with students. And I have all these plants that need divided, and I don't know who I'm going to give them to. So I've actually been thinking about just making little pots where you form them off of tin cans, you know, soup cans out of paper, and then filling them up and just setting them outside on the sidewalk with free on them. You know,
I'm coming.
I'll let people know when they're on my street corner. So.
I'll be there.
So,
Nolan Hill from Panhandle PBS wanted to comment. Nolan?
Hi, Jill. It's good to see you. It's good to see everybody. I just wanted to comment on the topic of food because at Panhandle PBS, we have an interesting situation right now. We normally have a dinner series that also works as a fundraiser for Panhandle PBS called Savor the Goods. And we work with the West Texas Chef's Table to bring chefs in to do a demo, to cook this wonderful meal. We have these beautiful dinners with, 100 people all coming together and sharing this food and enjoying it together. And, you know, at PBS, we've really kind of had to rework the way we're doing things. And so I think Hillary, who was my boss and my good friend, she had come together to come up with this idea of Savor the Goods at home and doing a content piece that we could put out for folks in town that represents what Savor the Good means to us, and bring it to that digital format, bring it into people's homes, get them cooking more. We all find ourselves cooking more and trying to scavenge everything we can out of the pantry. So we've come up with this Savor the Goods at home. And I think if there's been one interesting thing I've found about all of us working to create new content in this pandemic is innovation and figuring out, okay, we can take this dinner series and make it at home. We can provide content for folks that's educational and entertainment, but that also kind of lends to our brand as well. So we've been working really hard at trying to take the normal things that we do through Panhandle PBS and bringing them to a digital or an online format. And we released our first video, I believe, just a few days ago, and we've gotten a wonderful feedback from people on that. So I think really, if the one thing I've taken away from all this, yeah, it's more difficult, it's more complicated, but we're innovating in a new way. And we're realizing that, even once this pandemic is over and maybe we can have some Savor the Goods dinners, we can still do Savor the Goods at home. That's great content we can bring to people in their homes who maybe can't get out to Savor the Goods dinners. So I've actually really enjoyed working with our content team to innovate new ways to bring that creativity to people who maybe we had never even considered before.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was just going to add to that, obviously, because I work with Nolan. I think it's been really, I keep going back to that thing that Alex said about just working with what you have. And I think what we have, more than our medium, are our different areas of expertise and how we've had to really lean on each other as a team and really get creative about how we're doing it. And it's difficult when you've learned one way of doing something your whole life, and then this is what we're all facing right now. It's nothing we've ever experienced before. So I've really enjoyed the creativity and the innovation with that. And I think, yes, we'll all be excited to have dinners together again, because
yes,
Maya, I love your idea, and Renee, I want some of your vegetables. Because I
think coming.
Awesome. It's something we all miss, and it's something that we all share. We all eat food. So it's been fun to come up with a way to still connect people through something they've already grown accustomed to through PBS. So thanks for bringing that up, Nolan.
The advantage that we have is that we're all creators, and
yeah,
we're creative by nature, and so we have a real advantage because we're already creatives.
Normally, we would have a panel discussion like this in Russell Hall 131, and there would actually be refreshments. You wouldn't have to bring your own, but yours probably are better than ours. And so we have become creative about the way we deliver information and teach. And I think part of me says we're going to get so much out of this and move forward with all of these new skills. And this other part of me says, when can we go back to the good old days when things were normal? So
please give me my classroom back.
Yes, please let me go back in the classroom. So there is a real dichotomy there between the good and the bad. And I hope that when we move forward and move on, we take the things we've learned, hang on to those things and the new ways of doing things, and then return to all the great things that we all miss right now. And I think that we've seen that there's a tremendous amount of talent just in the Amarillo College community that we can weigh on and draw on. And we're fortunate to be with so many amazing creators to inspire us. So this particular panel is drawing to a close, but it may be ending, but it's not over, because the music department is going to be the next group to take up the issue of creativity through crisis. And they will be holding a panel discussion with musicians on Thursday of this week from 2 to 3 p.m. And I am sure that that will be posted online, because I know you guys can't capture that Zoom link, but I invite everyone to join that group. I have seen some really interesting, not seen, really heard, coronavirus songs composed. And so I think we could also do a coronavirus inspired song event as well. And I do want to encourage everyone to check out the virtual exhibit at the Amarillo Museum of Art. Amazing work by Amarillo College and West Texas A&M visual arts students. And then later we will have the high school students' work. And so this is definitely somewhere that people should be heading and directing their children to, so that they can see everything that's going on. Alex Gregory, Stephanie Young, Brene West, Hillary Hulsey, any final words as we wrap this up?
Just say I feel pretty fortunate to have 3 young kids at home, and connecting with them and spending more time with them, being present with them. I've always wished for more time with my family, and so now that I have it, I think being creative with the food you prepare and what you do in your garden and what you make at the table, the conversations that you have, that just being present and take advantage at this time, just kind of switch that perspective. But I know not everyone's in the same position I'm in, so I'll leave that.
That focus on gratitude for what we have instead of being sad about what we don't have is really important.
Make art.
I've been fortunate to being quarantined with my 88-year-old grandmother. And I tell you what, you learn a lot from somebody who's seen 88 years of life. And, you know, she's taking this all in stride. But don't forget your elders and people who might be kind of lonely during this time. Reach out to them. Share your art with them.
Really great advice, Hillary.
Definitely. I think that emphasis on gratitude is the right one.
Well, personally, I'm grateful for everyone who joined us tonight, because this was just a crazy idea, and I appreciate everyone who helped make it happen, and I enjoyed seeing everyone. And who knows, it's possible we will do it again as a group, and you should catch the music department's presentation later this week. Thank you all, and many of you, I will see you in class.
Thank you so much for hosting this.